Reena, what is your mission?
Uh, my mission, which probably has its root on a very personal level, is to continue my own recovery 27 years from an addiction to food, but it doesn't really matter, food, drugs, alcohol, and to help others on their own journey, on their own path to recover their lives. And I understand, yes, addiction is with a substance or a habit, gambling or overeating, the act of overeating. But addiction is also, as I understand it, self-defense mechanisms, ways that we protect ourselves or cope with things that are too much for us. And our coping mechanisms become too much for us, become destructive to us. So in that sense, addiction is more broad. I define it more broadly, and it's a lot of us. I think we really pay a big price for being in this technological age, because the age of technology saves time, no time, saves time, no time. And when we're meeting challenges in our lives, they're not speedy. They're not speedy. Our souls aren't speedy, and to get the inner resources and the tools to deal with the soul, it's not speedy. And we've kind of lost that.
So how do you see the eating disorders in conjunction with this whole information age where things are
Right.
moving so fast? I mean, is this play on the fact that there are young people or older people more stressed out?
Yes, yes. First of all, I want to say, because there are people who would hear me and say, well, eating disorders, that's not an addiction. In fact, I just had a conversation with a nutritionist who is also treating one of my clients. I say the bottom line is it's a bit of a different model than drugs and alcohol, but recovery based on the 12 steps begins with the first step saying, I am powerless over eating or over self-starving or over throwing up or over drugs or alcohol. So it's a model of addiction. And I say that food is it's the most available drug, or also starving. It's the thing people, it's the, nagish in Hebrew, it's easiest. In the home of a rabbi, it was the most available drug. And it's cheap. Drug addicts almost always have to go to prison for stealing because it's an expensive habit. Um, when I was studying family therapy 35 years ago, they were talking about how to treat eating disorders. There was a very typical model of a dysfunctional family that wasn't working right, and then a young woman would develop the symptom of overeating, bulimia or whatever. But today it's not true. Today society has so changed, also with the obsession about food and being thin and being healthy. But the obsession with thinness, but also it's an addiction like any other addiction. And America has been called, in literature, the addicted society. And Israel's right there, right behind it. And we're talking about TV, and we're talking about internet.
And specifically, what disorders do you mainly focus in on in helping
Okay,
your clients?
okay. I do want to say that in the last 20 years, I've worked in prisons and in drug rehab centers and alcoholics and with drug addicts. And I love it. I've loved it. Working with them is all in misgarot. My English is in within a setting. In my private work, it's usually people who come to me with any form of an eating addiction, or people who come to recover their lives without a specific addiction, well-being. Um,
What makes your approach different,
right,
possibly, or
right.
unique
Yes.
than others?
Well, this same nutritionist said to me on the phone how much her client loves coming to me. And I have less clinical training than other psychologists who have sent people to me for recovery. And I think it's because I combine what I've learned, first of all, in the classrooms, but what I've learned, I was 34 years before I broke free. and had done a bachelor's and a master's in family therapy with a man who was the pioneer in anorexia treatment. But the 27 years since that I've lived it and continue to live it, because you don't finish with an addiction. An alcoholic will say he's dry for 20 years, 6 days, 3 months, and 4 hours. And even more so, because you don't say goodbye to food. And I know, as a recovering person, it's not that there's a forbidden group of foods. There isn't, unless you're sick in some way. What's forbidden is to use food like a drug, because you're sad or lonely or whatever, is to use food. So you need to always be aware of yourself, that you're eating for the right reasons. And if you're in an emotional turmoil, what else can I do? So getting back to your specific question, I use an integrative approach. I combine different modalities that I've also learned along the way, such as also guided imagery and journaling and movement. But I have to admit that, and I worked at Schneider Hospital for 2 years in the Department of Eating Disorders. I saw there women who had been inpatient who were angry. They were just angry. And I know, and I incorporate the spiritual dimension. You can call it humanism, you can call it soul, but I combine that with traditional psychotherapy. And I'll tell you, I heard a lecture at Beit Tfilah, the Progressive Judaism Kehillah, 4 years ago or 5 years ago by a man, Kaspi, I'll think of his first name, who wrote a book called Lidrosh Elohim. He's Yuval Kaspi. He is Chiloni, he's not religious. And he wrote a book, Lidrosh Elohim. I forget what he called his book when it came out in English, To Seek God. And he made this statement on a Shabbat afternoon that you can't get rid of the inner Pharaoh, you can't liberate yourself from the inner Pharaoh unless you believe that there's something bigger than Pharaoh. And I raised my hand wildly. I said, that's the basis of the 12-step program of addictions. I've come to understand there's a higher power. Because if we're so stuck in this addiction, praying every day, this is my last day of using, only the belief that there's something bigger than me and my addiction, and being able to say, I need help, can really do it. Although I have to say that when my work had begun to change in integrating all of this because of my own breakthrough 27 years ago, I went back to New York and found that there was a whole group that exists of spiritual psychotherapy, NIH, based in New York, made of psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, of other professionals, mental health, who also understand that it's psychology with spirit, and spirituality from Judaism as well as from Buddhism, because it's all one, that allow a person to break free. I think another reason that my work works, and I'm going to be an older lady in a few days, and I've been able to say my work works, partly because I've lived these years, but also because I'm not afraid to try something different. I said to a client last week, I know what the textbooks say, and my supervisor, when I bring private tiki and private files, cases, she's a traditional Gestalt known all over the country. But I know what's right to do, and then I may go and I then say, you look really great today, or say something that's not, or in the middle of a session, I will say, now I'm changing hats, and I'm going to talk to you like a recovering person. And I will share things that I know only because I'm on the journey. And I think it's that connection. And the bottom line, usually you don't know much about your therapist. And many therapists work hard to keep their lives private. And I do too. On the other hand, they start out by knowing I'm in recovery. And my message is, I put myself out there to say, you can get out of this. 34 years, and I remember starting to struggle with food at age 5 or 6, feeling fat. It's a long time to wake up every day and hate yourself and feel hate yourself, pray to get out of it. It's a long time. And there was no one there who could say to me, Reena, there's a way out. I don't sell truth. I feel like I try to help, I'm the mirror, try to help someone hear their truth, because we know inside. And the other thing with eating, and again, it's my own journey and with what I've learned, continue to learn from other teachers, is that I have learned that someone with a severe eating disorder, obesity, anorexia, or in between, can learn to access their natural hunger of being full and being hungry, and for what? There's a time and place for junk. Our souls need junk. The Indian tradition says that if the soul were at a taste, it would be sweet. Or Bamba. That there's an inner mechanism. And if someone had said to me 33 years ago, Reena, you can learn what your hunger is, what your feelings of full are, I would have said hogwash, you know. But I've experienced it.
How is the working with specifically Israelis compared to working in the States?
The difficulty of being heavy in Israel is more. It's heavier. It's in its emotional. You know, big is okay, and you can't discriminate against a big person. You know, that's a whole movement there. I mean, Israel isn't there. But there's another big difference that I find, that people who have any kind of addiction often have started to use their drug of choice, food or starvation, or because there's a chemical imbalance, and it's covered up their chemical imbalance. And in Israel, and so it needs a medicine. And today we are lucky in technology that there's such incredible discoveries. There's not one pill for anxiety. They're all different dimensions and we're lucky. People don't have to suffer today the way they suffered in my grandmother's generation. So today we have a rich range of answers to help a person balance himself chemically, which will also allow him to give up his addiction. Because people have learned to use also drugs, but also food. In Israel, there's still that headset against it. And it's not rational. It's just, no, we don't want to take a medicine. We don't want to take a medicine. And that's hard. I believe that when a person is given the correct medicine, they become themselves. Because they're born, it's like with what color hair or how big you are, genetics. We inherit our chemicals. So they have a chemical imbalance. Taking the right medicine allows them to balance and become themselves and change their lives and give up their addictions. I haven't said it, but the basis of being able to give up an addiction is changing your life, changing your behaviors, not your soul. Being able to change your reaction, your relationships, and then you don't need to use. You can reach me at 052-523-2060, 052-523-2060, or 077-780-2012.
And you have a website
but yes,
too.
I was going to say yes. They can also reach me and get a feeling for what I do. Go to the website with your loudspeaker turned on so you can hear the quiet music that I work with. ReenaKeren.com, REENA.com, and
Reena Keren.
ReenaKeren.com.
So it's REENAKEREN.com.